What is going on, everybody? This is Crypto Ed. Thank you for joining us today. We're pretty excited with all the sessions we're having so far, and I hope you are learning a lot out of this. Today, I'm very excited about the session because I'm sure a lot of you here, unless you were in crypto since 2011, most of you who joined after 2017 are not developers. You guys are non-developers, like myself, and probably a lot of other people. Like, we see that there's a lot of excitement in the space, but we don't know the code to get in. And the exciting thing is, we don't have to feel that we are trapped in this prison of like non-tech development, because there's a movement of no code projects that are coming over to the blockchain stage, and it's making it possible for non-devs to start leading. So yeah, I'm excited to introduce to you Andrew Chu. Andrew Chu from One to All, and yeah, Andrew's going to share with you about how the future of Web3 is no code. So Andrew, the stage is yours.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Ed, and thanks everybody for joining. I'm really excited about this topic. It's near and dear to me, as you might imagine. Just a really brief background about myself. I've actually been in product management in fintech for 10 years now, and actually building marketplaces in the context of two startups. One has since gone public, actually. And a little bit about my background with respect to the technical side, or non-technical side rather. Despite having, this is going to date me, but a computer science degree from 20 plus years ago, I definitely do not consider myself, technical these days, or a developer. So, no code, I think, is a really important tool for myself, but I think for many others, going forward. And finally, I think for those of you who are looking to get into this space, I'm also a solo founder, and again, I'd consider myself a non-technical founder. So hopefully, what we'll go through is going to be useful and helpful for you. So just jumping right in, what I thought would be good is just actually to take a step back. So Web3, I think I'm preaching to the choir here, right? So Web3 in itself is a huge revolution, and for those of you in this space, I'm sure it feels like, every minute feels like a month in terms of the innovation and just the pace of things, right? But I also think it's important to take a step back and also recognize that what we're seeing right now, and it indeed is a revolution for sure, has actually been in the works for decades, right? So, these are just some quotes that I think were particularly relevant and resonated with me. Some thought leaders in a variety of spaces. But what we're seeing, I think, is again the realization of things that people have been dreaming of for 10, 20 years. So dating back to Mark Andreessen, obviously saying software is going to eat the world. I think for those of you familiar with the sovereign individual, I think a lot of people in the Web3 and DeFi space, are fans of that particular work. Again, technology is facilitating decentralization, but also empowerment of people to basically, make a living for themselves, to choose their own, profession. And then finally, for those of you who may not be familiar, Tony Seba I really highly recommend. Again, a really profound thought leader, effectively predicted some things like, EVs, 10 years ago. And he's actually made some additional predictions recently about the next 10 years. And a lot of those actually center around, again, decentralization. But I think one of the really interesting things that he's kind of focused on is where that innovation and where that, change is going to come from. And in his mind, it's actually going to come from not from the, largest, most prominent countries and states, et cetera, but actually from the smaller, more adaptable groups and communities. And again, for those of you who may be new to Web3 or just getting familiar, that's really close to the ethos of Web3, right? So self-organizing, whether it's DAOs, companies, organizations, or even just individuals who are contributing in their own way, across the spectrum. So each of these things is coming to the fore, but there is a bit of an issue, right? Again, for those of you who are familiar with Web3 and working in the space, this might be something that you feel a little more viscerally, which is, you know, a lot of the innovation, again, is happening in real time. But at least in my experience, there's still so much more that we could be building. And I think one of the things that is potentially holding us back, and this is certainly not, you know, kind of at the, you know, at the fault of the developers themselves. There's just simply not enough of them. So, you know, a couple of quick stats, right? This is high level, but, you know, year after year, we're looking at millions of coding roles being available, you know, globally. And at the same time, we're only seeing, you know, a fraction of that in terms of people who are actually, you know, trained and experienced, and you know, let's say seasoned in terms of development and coding. And those are diverging, right? So at this point, I'm pretty confident to say that the amount of roles is not going to go down. It's only going to increase. In addition, you know, if you focus in specifically into the Web3 space and let's say NFTs, there's also a quote from the former head of product at OpenSea, where they were handling, you know, the lion's share of the volumes in the NFT space with a team of about 40 individuals, right? And I think on the face of it, you could think that that's actually not a bad ratio in terms of development and productivity. But I think there's also another bottleneck, right? And another issue with that, which is if we're really going to realize the true, you know, ethos of Web3, we need to broaden the number of people that can actually contribute to that innovation and actually support the volume and the activity in the community, and not have to necessarily focus that or rely on, you know, a group of 40, 50, 60 developers to do that. So that brings us to what I think is really a central mechanism, you know, a key to basically, you know, solving for this critical bottleneck, right? And that is no code. And if you think about it, and this is just a little chart to illustrate that to a degree, the ideal scenario for us as a community is we move, you know, further along this graph, this chart, right? The more people we can empower to do and to build sophisticated applications, tools, you know, content, the more diverse and the more innovation we facilitate, right? And previously, and actually even arguably in the current state of things in Web3, if you're going to do something that is, you know, grounded in Web3 and you're trying to innovate, a lot of times you are, again, necessarily kind of limited in terms of your development resources. And that, you know, unfortunately, in a lot of cases translates directly into financial, you know, resources, right? So without, I think, a fundamental change in terms of how we approach development and how we approach building really the foundation of Web3, you know, I think we're going to be running into those bottlenecks until we solve for that. The good news is, I think, you know, in parallel to the Web3 revolution, no code has finally hit that threshold where it's become a viable solution to really address this specific problem. And the closest thing that I can, you know, relate it to in my mind is actually this. So for those of you who you know, kind of recognize this is the printing press, right? And you know, we'll talk about the perception of no code. We'll touch on that, but again, in my mind, I think, you know, some may kind of view this as hyperbole, but I really don't think it is. I think hitting this threshold in terms of having a viable no code solution is in a lot of ways equivalent to the invention of the printing press, right? Not only did that have a huge impact in terms of productivity and what we were able to create, as societies and as communities, but it also had really drastic societal impacts in terms of, let's say, literacy, right? And obviously that was language literacy. What we're talking about today is programming literacy and development literacy, right? Let's say. I think no code is going to allow for that step change in programming literacy to happen over the next 10 years. So a little bit about the perspective or perception of no code, right? I think many of you have probably seen this quote from Mahatma Gandhi. It's used in a lot of contexts, usually for, let's say, the underdogs. And I think in no code, with respect to no code, that is unfortunately the case. A lot of times, if you're speaking about no code, particularly to someone who's been, let's say, in the technology sector for a long time, or even to, let's say, investors, right? VCs and potentially sources of capital. They have a bit of a bias against no code, and I think in some ways that actually is warranted based on the previous implementations, right? Previously, while we did have no code solutions, they were typically let's say limited, or in some cases really limited in terms of major trade-offs, right? So if you were going to build something simpler, you could leverage it. But if you approached a certain level of complexity, at a certain point, either you wouldn't be able to, build it outright, or you'd have to sacrifice some of the scope and some of the, functionality effectively, right, to make it happen. I think that those trade-offs and those drawbacks are, if not completely mitigated, they're on the way to being completely mitigated. And because of that, and because we have, now potentially a viable solution, I think no code is a real 10x technology. For those of you who may be familiar with Peter Thiel's work, 0 to 1, he has a basic tenet, which is in order to make, a real significant innovation, whether that's in a product or type of technology, it needs to be 10 times better than the previous thing. And I think for a variety of reasons, no code definitely meets that threshold. Why? So, we could step through these, in a little more detail. So in terms of speed, and you'll see why this is the case as we walk through an actual example, you could build a functionally comparable application in an order of magnitude less time than it would take from a traditional software development perspective. Just to give an example, I was able to build the beta of One2All, which is, as it stands, still the only NFT marketplace built entirely in no code. We built the beta from scratch in about 4 weeks, right? Since that time, others have been able to take that base application and build effectively their own customized marketplaces in 1 to 2 weeks. We're always looking to bring that time span down, but even I think at that point, we're talking about 3 times, 5 times improvement in terms of typical development cycles, right? Secondly, if you're looking to be a non-technical founder, this is a huge benefit. One, because depending on the scope of what you're trying to build, you can either look for additional resources. So there is a growing and pretty robust community and ecosystem of no-code developers. So even if you want to augment your own resources, you can do that. The benefit there is typically these resources are going to be more cost effective on a let's say hourly basis, and also easier to fill, right? Because the technical skill set that you need is not as not as kind of far along the spectrum, right, in terms of expertise and experience. And finally, in terms of costs, right, that translates directly into, again, in the context of a non-technical founder, your startup costs. So if you're looking to get an idea, a vision from your head that you've been dreaming about, and you want to implement it. Again, depending on the scope, typically today you may have to look for an angel investment or look for funding. And the primary reason in our space is because you need to hire developers. But if you're now able to develop and to get, let's say, even to a proof of concept, a working proof of concept and prototype in a faster time with, let's just say 25% of the cost, that makes a huge difference. And it actually puts you in a position potentially to bootstrap your startup, which again, speaking from my own experience, just gives you a lot more leverage and freedom in terms of the things you want to think about and frankly, how you go about building your startup. So I did want to speak a little bit about the actual platforms. I think we're starting to get to the point where, despite no code still not, I think, being fully appreciated for its potential, you are hearing about it more and more. So if you look around the space, people use that term. It's becoming a little bit buzzwordy. So I did want to make the point that not all no code is created equal. It's my view here, and I'm certainly not an expert by any stretch, is purely based on my experience. So I'm not being sponsored or anything by Bubble, but this is based on my experience using it and also my experience as a product manager. So in products, what we try to do is, the majority of time is try to dream up new applications, new functionality, and bring that to life. And, even today, if you're looking to use the most cutting edge development processes like Agile, et cetera, it's still a pretty arduous, and in the case of being a founder, pretty expensive process, right? So in using Bubble, getting to know it, it has a couple of really big, distinct benefits that you might not necessarily get from other platforms. And those are, just kind of walking through this below. I think the three that are the most important is having a really easy to use visual development interface. That's one. Two is the ability to link those interfaces with logic and workflows, again, in a really easy and rapid way. And then three, this one is not actually focused on as much, but the ability to get instant feedback. So having it compile as quickly as possible. And in the case of Bubble, it's really pretty impressive how they've done it. Is literally as you're building, you can have the screen in the app, operating in a separate tab. And as soon as you push the code, you just go to the other tab and you hit refresh, and there it is. It's been deployed. So if you think about this from a traditional software development perspective, this compresses the amount of time it typically takes not only to build a prototype, but to iterate on it. So the pace of innovation has basically been collapsed from, kind of orders of weeks and months to days and weeks. And I think that is a huge game changer in Web3, for Web3, but actually more broadly as well. So you may be asking, for some of you who may not be familiar with Bubble or the things that it can do, you may be asking, okay, but what can you really build, right? And, how about Twitter? So I'd actually recommend, this is actually up, you can go look at it. This is not real Twitter, this screenshot. This is a screenshot from a Twitter made entirely in no code, built in Bubble, but it has all of the functionality, let's say 90% of the functionality that you would expect for the production Twitter application. And that's, again, when I looked at this for the first time, I kind of, LOL'd, at first glance. But the more you play with it, I think the more it opens your eyes, right? Because this is a real application, and others have built similar, functionally equivalent applications in very compressed timeframes. So again, not months, but we're talking hours, days, and weeks. So you can look at this, notrealtwitter.com. you can actually, just do a search, and you can pretty easily find clones or versions of other applications. Again, full featured clones of things like Uber, Reddit, Airbnb. Basically, if you can think of it, somebody has probably built a clone of it. So again, in terms of compression of the development cycle, this is huge, but this also is huge in terms of starting points, right? If you have an idea that is a progression of a previous application or an iteration of it, you don't necessarily need to start from scratch. A lot of these templates, and actually including OneTall itself, is available for white labeling. That could give you a huge head start, an additional head start in terms of what you're trying to build. So I'm just keeping an eye on time here, and I'll probably step through these last couple pages a little more quickly, but I did want to give an actual example of how you implement a Web3 functionality in the context of no code, and specifically in Bubble. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do one of the most basic steps you need for any application, Web3 app, and that's to be able to connect to a wallet, right? So first step of being able to connect to a wallet, we need a button. So this will cycle through, but basically what you're seeing here is the editor of Bubble. This is actually the visual development interface. And as you might expect for something like this, I think they've done a nice job. It's drag and drop. So what I've basically done is I've taken a button from the left-hand side, dragged it, and I just changed the name of that button right away. And there you go. I have my button. So that's just step one, right? Second step. So the ecosystem around Bubble in particular has become also increasingly robust, to the extent that now there are hundreds of no-code developers. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of templates and plugins that people have built. And that's because Bubble has actually been around for 7 years. So, originally when it was founded, the two founders basically have built this, gradually over the course of the past 7 years, and just, knocking off pain point after pain point. And so along with that, they have a pretty dedicated and, devoted group of enthusiasts at this point. So one of the plugins that I've come across is a Web3 plugin built by a team that I've actually partnered with, and that's Easy Code, a great team. And here you'll see again, it's cycling, but here's the list of plugins. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to take an invisible little widget, and that actually houses the logic. All of the logic for Web3 and MetaMask is in this little invisible widget. And that's all we had to do. We'd have to just get the plugin, take the widget, drop it into the page. In this case, this is a header, but effectively the same, right? Next step, what we want to do is to create a workflow, right? So we have a button. We have a widget with logic built into it by way of a plugin, but the two aren't talking to each other. So what we need to do is connect them up. So what we're going to do, and you'll see this again when this cycles through, is literally we're just going to take that button that we dropped earlier and add a workflow. So here we go. We are going over to the button. You'll see now we're looking at the properties. We're going to click Start, Edit Workflow. And right away, in this case, Bubble is really intuitive. It knows, because you're trying to edit a button, that what you're likely trying to do is put a quick workflow around it. So immediately it generates that, and now you have a button, the logic, and the start of a workflow, which is effectively it's the if of the if-then statement in traditional programming. So in this case, the if is, hey, this button's been clicked. And finally, what we need to do is add the actual then, the logic behind that. And what you'll see here when we look to add an action, there's a huge set of options in terms of the things that you can do. And the way they built this out, again, is really intuitive. So what we're going to do, actually, if you take a look, is there it is, connect to MetaMask, right? And so we're just going to select that, point it to the widget that we dropped earlier, widget A, and that's it. And this workflow, which we did in basically 4 steps, and if you get used to working in this type of environment, you could imagine doing something like this in minutes. And this is effectively the same workflow we use in one-to-all for that particular step to connect to a MetaMask wallet. And so once that's live and up and running, you hit the button through the plugin, it knows to launch your MetaMask pop-up, and then you can interact and sign in just like you would for any other Web3 application. So again, in the interest of time, I'll kind of go through this quickly, but basically, I think not only for Web3, but for NFTs, this combination of no code with Web3 is a huge benefit, particularly for the philosophy of NFTs, because again, the focus and the goal is to try to decentralize as much as possible. And in that case, what you need is something that is a viable option for non-technical founders, something that reduces costs, but again, by orders of magnitude, ideally. Thirdly, a way to actually circumvent or to get more control around your own fees and royalties, right? And I think, again, that's going to be really important for Web3 and more specifically in NFTs, because creators are going to want more and more control over the entire end-to-end experience of NFTs. And that includes the marketplace. And so, all this has been, leading to, our work at One2All, which is to build, really the goal and the mission was to build a marketplace in no code, but ultimately to leverage that and to help others, facilitate others' innovation in the space. Really quickly on the philosophy behind this, right? For one, One2All, it's actually based on a Taoist proverb, which is, one leads to two leads to three, and three leads to the 10,000 things. It's really kind of a descriptive proverb of the process of creativity and creation, right? And in my mind, that one is the idea, right? Starting with an idea and taking it ultimately to a realized application. And so hopefully One2All helps with that, particularly again in the NFT space. But secondly, I think what's really important is developing relationships and building something that resonates specifically with the community that you're trying to help and trying to serve, right? And that requires something that's more custom made, more tailored. And so again, the goal is to create something that a non-technical founder could leverage and really customize to the extent that it really resonates with whether it's users, customers, or community members that they're trying to serve and to connect with. So I'll just wrap up because I know we're going to be jumping into the next session pretty quickly, and I do want to try to take some questions if possible. So really excited. We're actually launching our MVP today, coincidentally, along with Art Basel that's going on in Miami right now. So really high level, but our MVP has actually gone live with our first partner implementation. You can actually check it out at niftymuse.com. Really talented team there that's focused on taking traditional artworks, so physical artworks, and animating them, basically bringing them to life in a living image, and then creating NFTs off of that. So definitely give them a look. In parallel, I'm working with multiple launch partners actually. So they're all non-technical founders, and they all run the gamut of ideas in terms of the things that they're trying to do, from NFTs for good to esports to again, really runs the gamut. So again, and that's the goal. That's the mission, is to help create, in my mind, let's say 10,000 high quality NFT markets that all uniquely serve their independent, their own communities. And finally, looking forward a little bit, One2All is actually looking to build the first tip-based marketplace. So no minimum transaction fee. And this is the focus is going to continue to be help on the partners and helping them to build their markets. But I think this is another way to give back to the community because again, no code has the benefit of reducing costs and the overall structure of building markets. And I spoke briefly in terms of the timeline, right? So 4 weeks to build the beta. And in the case of Nifty Muse in particular, it took basically 2 weeks from a blank application, or sorry, in that case, starting with One to All, it took 2 weeks to create their custom application.